Welcome to the HIT podcast, H.I.T, Human Resources, Insurance, and Technology. I'm your host, Toby Kennedy. Thank you so much for joining us. We are dropping into your feed on Tuesdays every week with what we hope are really well curated, bite-sized, awesome conversations with good thought leaders and fun people in the space of human resources. So join us every week. This week's episode will be absolutely no exception. Super excited. This week's episode is brought to you by Montage Insurance Solutions. And without any further ado, let's get right into it. Kelsy, how are you?
Great. How are you doing?
Good. I'm so glad to have you join us. We have Kelsy Colwell on with us. Kelsy, I met you at a credit union HR training function, but let me just ask you, before we dive in too far and too deep, give me just a little bit of background on you, kind of how we get you in the chair today. Who's Kelsy?
Sure. So I'm a small town girl from northern Idaho. Grew up right on the edge of the wilderness, on the Nez Perce Native American reservation, and so had an amazing time just like running the mountains as a kid. But I didn't necessarily have a lot of opportunities, and so I kind of got into technology a little bit, but back then too, I was like, I don't want to work in a cubicle by myself all the time. So
Yeah.
I went into education because I was like, hey, right, I'm going to be a teacher because it's so awesome. No, I actually love being a teacher. I did work in the financial institution industry for about 5 or 6 years, being a teller, a new accounts person, originating loans, to put myself through school to become a high school math teacher, which my husband would walk into my classroom and go, how do you do this? But I loved it. I really did I loved the chaos and the creativity. But doing some fun things with technology in my classroom, I got a phone call from Seattle TSA one day because I was doing a bunch of technology stuff. And they were like, hey, we want to model our training program after your classroom. And I was like, okay, like I don't know anything about this, but all right. And so we shared with them what we were doing in my classroom. And they said, hey, have you ever thought of being a corporate trainer? And I was like, tell me more. Like, I'm a little girl from Podunk, Idaho. I don't even know what you're talking about. And so that was kind of my introduction to the training world, as far as on the corporate side. And so I did land my first job in a credit union, which was cool because my mom left home when I was about in middle school to go back to work working in a credit union. And so have been working in the credit union space now for I think it's like eight years. Like, so I was a school teacher for 5, 6 years, been in the credit union space for a while. Love the world of training, and in that world fell in love with change management. I think I watched it be really successful in watching people shift culture even when I was a kid and a young adult, and then to experience it in a more formalized way in the corporate side. It's part of absolutely everything that I do and that my team does in what we do. So we're pretty passionate about it.
I I love everything you just said, and the passion part is so clear. I know we have some listeners that are on like Spotify and Apple Podcasts and stuff. We do also shoot to camera for YouTube, and your passion and energy is so clear. I'm sure it's clear in your voice, and it just beams off you. And that was one thing to where when I was in attendance of a seminar you were leading, so you were coaching a room full of, frankly, high-level HR practitioners on your philosophy with respect to not only training, but as you mentioned, change management. And I sat through what was maybe an hour or 75 minutes talk, and there must have been a Toby-shaped cloud in my chair as I bolted afterwards to sprint towards you and say, hi, you don't know me, but I run a podcast, and my goal is to bring amazing people to my HR listeners. And if you could take that big, beautiful talk you gave and dial it down to our 15-ish minute world, boy, would I be eternally grateful. And so that is how we find ourselves here today. So first and foremost, thank you.
You bet.
So diving into it, as I mentioned, part of the premise of what we're trying to do here is go out and find folks that have really great and amazing things to say and kind of ask them to put it into our bite-sized nutshell. So just sort of taking that kind of large, kind of 50,000 foot view and then maybe drilling down from there. What was the topic and what are kind of your key tenets and how can we dive into it from here?
Yeah, so a lot of times when we train leaders on change management, when we're working with our stakeholders, what we brought to the HRD Network conference for HR and training practitioners was ProSci is one of the leading change management kind of companies, models. They're incredible. I think at one point the statistic was that over half or the majority of Fortune 500 companies use their change management strategies, which is pretty significant when you think about any kind of model or strategy. And so they have an ADKAR model, and the first three letters, ADK, are for awareness, desire, and knowledge. And we like to talk about those first. And their model really talks about, or their framework, I guess, talks about the people side of change. How do you help people change? And that they kind of have to go in that order. Like if they don't have awareness, if awareness and knowledge are a problem, you kind of got to go build awareness before you're able to tackle knowledge. And it works amazing in our training space because everybody's just like, we need training, we need training. But then everybody forgets, and we can even forget about the awareness and the desire. And so I think one of the things that we always talk to people about, but especially at that conference, is we try to help people understand those three little tiny pieces. And then immediately we try to throw them into scenarios that are really relevant to what they do on an everyday basis. And we go, hey, you've got somebody who's resistant to change. They're having some challenges. By the way, we're all resistant to change sometimes too, right? So that doesn't mean it's bad. It's super normal. And so what does this person maybe need from you to help? And I think you were kind of talking about like some of my value systems or why this is important to me. I could talk methodology to you all day, which I'm a nerd, so really like that stuff. That's why I have a degree in mathematics, because I'm a total nerd. My husband cracks adorable jokes at me. He calls me his beautiful nerd because I may do trig in the background to relax. But I could talk methodology with you all day. But what it really comes down to is if we want people to change, then we have to truly care, right? And so we could talk methodology all day, but I want people's lives to be better. That's why I'm in training. I want to help your life be better. I want to bring something to the table that increases efficiency, that turns the light bulbs on, that shifts the perspectives in a way that you go, man, I can do my job better. Man, my life, I can take this home with me. I can take this into my relationships. And I'm not sure I've ran across anything that does that better than change management. It just applies to every aspect of our life. And if we're going to be a practicer of it or a practitioner of it, we have to really make sure we stay in a very humble space that I don't get upset at people who are resisting change. I'm not frustrated when they're in process. It's okay that we have a very crunchy transition state. Those are all very normal human things. And then we use these tools we have to just help us keep moving, because sometimes we just go, hey, that's the future we want. So we just implement it and we're like, why is it not working? Well, we didn't plan to help anybody adopt the change. And so I just look at it as a process and a journey, and we're human. And how do we keep nipping away at it? And how do we plan for people well, not just information or a new system or a change in behavior, but how do I plan for each of those individual human beings who need to walk that change out? And I think that that's something that all of those methodologies can help us with, but we got to have that perspective first, or change management is really hard and frustrating.
Yeah, no, I think that that's really interesting kind of initial frame to get yourself into approaching change, and maybe just to ground the conversation. When you're talking about change in general, what are the spectrum of the types of change, or what are some examples? When we're sitting here talking about change management, that could be a kind of ethereal thought. Maybe to ground us a little bit, what are some examples of change?
Yeah, and I think a good thing to say first is let's describe what it isn't. So sometimes we'll hear a phrase called change control. That's usually more like an IT type thing where we're planning for a new system. When we say change management, we're talking about the people side of change. So we're talking about, hey, my company is changing a process, or we are getting a new system and we have to change our behavior. We have to change how we support members. Or maybe we have some service opportunities and we have to change some of the soft skills, which are critical skills, right? To adjust to providing better service. Or maybe we're making some structural changes in the organization and we're taking on maybe a new scope of clients. And so we have to shift our perspectives. And so when we think in any time, maybe I took on a new role, like as a human being, I took on a new role. That's change, right? And so every person is usually walking through multiple changes at a time. And when we lead a project, we have to really consider that, and how do we help them get through those different types of change change. For most of us, probably on this call, it's on the corporate side of the house. But then too, once you learn about this, it's like, man, my kids are all in middle school right now. I got some changes going on, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we got other things going on in our lives, right? We have inflation. I have change. How do I manage myself through that and plan through that? And so it then begins to apply in all the areas of our lives.
Yeah, I think that that adaptability is such a crucial skill. And so now bringing it back around to sort of where we started, what you've identified through some of your research and some of your kind of partner thought leaders is there's an order to these things, right? And so in order to successfully either implement or manage or traverse a change, we kind of have to keep three key things in mind and keep them in order. And they each have a definition and they each have a way that they crop up. Is that right?
Yes. And probably great to say awareness. If Toby has awareness, he can tell me what's changing, why is it changing, when is it changing, why is it changing now, and what's the risk of not changing? Those are kind of your five big questions. If he can't answer that, I got some work to do, and Toby needs me to help him gain more awareness. Desire, right? Gosh, we talked about this at HRD, and I have to always kind of bring this around is a lot of times people are like, well, they just don't want to. Well, there's a willingness issue. Well, they're resistant. And we think about desire really negatively. But what if it's that they're change saturated? There's just so much change that the idea of another one just, oh, it feels exhausting, right? And I got to figure out how to help them maneuver that. Or maybe we need to slow some changes down. And what else is impacting desire? Are they and maybe another department struggling? There's some trust and credibility issues, and we need to work on some relationship building there or some service level agreements there to help us move forward. Or there's so many components to desire. But if I can build awareness and desire, then when I get to knowledge, everybody's like, okay, yeah, let's learn about it. But if I go to knowledge first, then everybody's like, well, I don't want to, or I'm having these feelings, or I'm just in one ear and out another because I'm not in it. And so that's why going in that order is so important. And you bounce around as you realize, okay, we tried, but there's still a little bit of a hole over here. You just know you have to go fill things back in that order to really get a great outcome.
Yeah, I appreciated some of our conversation at the conference because what you were doing was helping us kind of grapple with maybe a change going poorly and sort of identify, because like you said, you want to try to hit all three of these, but maybe you're not where you want to be. And it's time to circle back and see, and just drilling down in each of these. Cause I love, when you're talking about desire, how you're talking about some relationship building and some of the things that might be necessary there. But before even diving into that on the awareness side, right? There's 5 things that you want to make sure that you can kind of tick off. Can we kind of bounce back through those and spend a half second on them so that people can say, okay, before I even move down the road of my change management, there is a roadmap for me to start with, and I want to make sure I hit these.
Yeah, and you really need to think about these questions when you're drafting communication. You may have heard the phrase 7 times 7 ways. Please don't think you're going to send an email of these once and everyone's going to get it. That's not going to happen. So you do need to communicate it probably in email. It needs to be in meetings. It also needs to be reinforced in training. It needs to become a conversation. But it's what's changing briefly, clearly. What is it? Why? Not muddily why. Why? Usually, really getting your why statement down clearly, it's going to take a little time. Like, oh, what? There's this and there's this. Like, yeah, you're eyeball deep in it. So step away and take a minute to go, what are my 2 sentences that really help somebody understand why are we making this change? And sometimes it's a little disappointing and like, well, the vendor is making this change, and so we have to adopt it, right? That's not a fun why, but at least your staff know. And sometimes it's this powerful why of like, we're getting ready to do this super exciting thing, but if you never share that, then people don't know. And so crafting that why statement is one of the most critical things you'll do. And then it's about timing. So what's changing? Why is it changing? When and why now? So why that timeline? Why is this urgent, or why is it coming in the next month? But then the second most important piece comes at the end. So that why statement's really critical, but here's the other one that most people skip. What's the risk of not? So what's the risk of not making this change? And usually that, again, in a couple well-crafted sentences, makes people go, oh, okay, I get it. I may not love it, or I don't know if I would have chosen that, but I get it and I can get on board with this. And so really getting good, we spend a lot of time with our stakeholders as we're helping them implement change and crafting training and communication for them, helping them craft those communications and those bullet points so they can then speak to them again and again and again.
All right, guys, we have to break the conversation there because we are sticking to our commitment of keeping our episodes bite-sized and digestible. We will pick this up next week. Thank you to all of our sponsors, TrueHue, Excel Health, Montage Insurance Solutions. We're going to break there and we're going to pick up with this fantastic conversation next week. And until next week, make this the best week yet.
There seems to be a suspicious